Hello and welcome. So we're going to be looking at how to switch from one scene to another in Unity using Bolt. And then also we're going to look at how to build a project when that project is complete. And so to do that, rather than deal with the things we've been developing so far, because there's a lot of complexity in there, I want to keep it simple and clean and kind of sandbox how to do this step. Well, the first thing we're going to do is make sure if you have a scene open that isn't saved, to go ahead and save your scene and just create a new scene. And then go ahead and save it. And I'm just going to save it as level 1. And I'm going to go ahead and put it in my scenes folder, which means I have to open this up. Okay, so I've got level 1, and because I'm in the same project that I've been working in, I do have a ton of assets already, right? I've already got, I've got several prefabs that I could pull in there, and I've got, even animated things. And so we're just testing this, to make sure that it works right. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my main assets folder, because what I want is I want a tile that does not move. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a plane. And I'm going to go ahead and apply one of these road materials to the plane, because I don't want this to move, right? I want it to stay static. It's just going to make our lives a lot easier. I have no idea why the camera is not seeing that. Oh, it's probably because of the position of this. So let me go ahead and zero this out, right? When I created this, it dropped it not at 0. So I'm going to go ahead and reset this to 0. And now I can see it in my camera view. I'm actually going to lift the camera up some. Currently it's 1 in the Y direction, and I actually am going to want that to be a little bit higher up, and then I'll rotate in the X direction to rotate the camera down just a touch. Okay, so we'll just have this one tile, and then if I select the tile in my view, right, I'm going to go ahead, and it's got the collider on it. Fantastic. So now I'm going to need something so I know that this is actually running, right? We need some indication of that. So I'm just going to go to my prefabs. And if you've been following along in the previous tutorials, one of the prefabs that we've got is this pickup. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that. And you'll see that it's also at a weird place. So I'm just going to click reset so it's centered at 0. And you, you can notice that it's actually been smashed flat. Maybe I shouldn't have reset it, right? Because I have settings there. So I'm just going to go ahead and zero out the position really quick. Okay, so now it's at 0, 0, 0, and I might just snug it up a little bit so it's not intersecting the road. I'm going to hit play real quick and just make sure that it's actually spinning, because I can't remember if I had the script on there or not that would do that. And I do believe I do. Right, so real quick, if I click on Edit Graph here, you can see there's this Rotate Y group over here. That's all you really need to do in Bolt to get this thing to spin. So you could create any object and make it spin. And then we have this player collision, right? So if a player collides with this, it makes a sound and disappears. And we're not really even necessarily going to have a player in this. We're just going to have a key that you hit that's going to switch you to a new scene. Okay, so I've got my first scene. I've done a ton of work. This is the most beautiful interactive experience anyone has ever seen before in their lives, and we're going to make millions and millions of internet dollars when we launch this on all the different app stores. Okay, so I've got this set. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new scene. And what I want to do is I want to copy this scene to do that. So first I'm going to save this, right? And you'd think you might be able to go to your assets here and go down to your scenes and say, where is this one? I have a lot of scenes in here, right? But so you think you'd be able to say, okay, level 1, and then just copy and paste it, or right click on it and copy. You can copy the path, but you can't copy it. What you have to do is just go up to File and go to Save As. And then you can, I'm going to call this one level 2. And for some reason, it doesn't default to going back into the correct folder. So I'm just going to scroll down to Scenes and hit Save. Okay, so this is level 2. So now we need some way to visually distinguish that we were on level 2 and not level 1. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my prefab in the scene, and I'm not selecting it down here because I just want to make some overrides to this so that there's a different material on a couple of the objects that make up the pickup. So I'm going to first start by selecting sphere. I'm going to go to materials, and I'm just going to use this plain material on the sphere. That's probably enough, but if you want to, you could also grab some other material or create some other material for the body of this thing. I'm just going to drop the water material on there, which is a pretty cheesy water material. All it's got on here is just a little bit of transparency, so you can kind of see through it, and it's shiny, right? I don't think I even have a reflection probe in here, so it's not really going to reflect the world or anything like that. Too exciting, all right? But so I've made this visually different. If I wanted to, I could also apply a slightly different material to this. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to put the ramp material on there, right? So that now we have two different scenes that are almost identical, but will allow us to switch between them. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now, a lot of times at this point, people will create an empty object that's a game manager. And this is something I should have done in the first scene, but we'll actually do it here, and then we'll copy it over. And so to do that, I'm just going to go, and other times, sometimes I like to use the canvas if I have UI elements up as the place where I attach those scripts to, and I just change it from canvas to game manager. It really depends on how you want to work, but I'm just going to go ahead and create an empty this time around, and I'm going to call it, I'm just going to call it game manager. And all we're going to do is, be using this to change scenes right now. That's the only functionality this experience has. So I'm going to go ahead and click add component and type in flow. So I have my flow machine. I could use a macro to do this. So let's go ahead and create a new macro, and I'm just going to call it, I'm going to go down to my scripts folder, because that's where I could have like a bolt graphs folder, but I'm putting these all in just a scripts folder. But so I'm going to say scripts, and I'm just going to say level changer. And I'm going to spell that right. Level changer. Hit save. I'm going to click edit graph. So we aren't going to need start or update at all in here. So we can right click, or we can select those and right click and delete the selection. We are going to need a trigger, right? And in this case, we're just going to have it so if we hit the return or enter key on the keyboard, it will switch scenes. So the first thing I need to do is I just need to type in on key and drop that on keyboard input and change space to return, right? Obviously, if you're on Windows, that should be enter instead of return, but it doesn't really matter. And so when the key is pressed down, it's going to switch levels. So how do I switch levels? The component that I need is part of the scene manager. So if I type in scene, and you'll see that there's all sorts of different options down here for these scenes. You can get the names, you can do all sorts of stuff. But if I click on scene manager, and really all I want to do is load scene, right? And there's several different options here. The one we're going to do is just load scene name. There's options because some have a build index number, which we'll actually look at what that is and how to set those soon. And then sometimes there's some other parameters that you might need to use to load the scene, right? Maybe one of those parameters is like the score from the previous scene gets transferred to the next scene, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and hit load scene. I'm going to connect my flow, and then I need to have my scene name. Now, this is a this is a macro. So if I was to put the scene name in here, which is I want this is level 2, so I want to be able to switch to level 1. If I was to put the scene name in here, then it would be the same when I go and reuse this again in scene 1, and it would load itself, which is not what we want to have happen. And so I need to go ahead and create a variable. It could be an object variable, would be totally fine. So I can go ahead and make the array I always make and not put a name in there. I'm going to just create a variable just called scene scene name. Hopefully that doesn't cause me any errors except my typing of it. There we go. I'm going to add that, and it's going to be a string. And the value is just going to be, right, level 1. And you want to make sure, like, go back to your project pane and just check in your scenes and make sure that it's capitalized and everything is exactly correct, or else it's not going to work. Okay, so I've checked, it's good. And so now what I can do is I can just grab this variable, pull it in here, and drop it down here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. And now what I can do to test it is I can just go ahead and hit play. And we'll see if it works or not. Okay, so if I hit enter, I get an error. Nothing happens. So what's going on? It says scene level 1 couldn't be loaded because it is not set in the build settings, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so how do we fix that? What we need to do in order for any of this to work, and in order for Unity to know the different scene names, even though they're assets, in order for them to be able to be loaded by the scene manager, what we need to do is we need to go up to File, and we need to go down to Build Settings. And I am going to actually see if I can delete. I'm going to remove all of these scenes that are on here real quick. Okay. So, so the first thing I want to do when I'm here, these are the scenes in the build, right? So I have a ton of scenes in my project, but I have absolutely no scenes in my build. Usually by default, you will have one scene in your build, which is like the sample, or like I used the Universal Render Pipeline template for this file initially. So by default, I believe that was the one that was set to be in the build. Right, so you have to tell Unity what scenes you want in the build, and then you can arrange the order. So if I click Add Open Scenes, right, now I've got this scenes level 2 is in there, and I've also got, and it's been set to, this is its index, which is 0, right? It's the first one. And so now what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to jump over to the other scene to add that second scene, right, to add scene 1. While we're here, there's a couple settings that we can look at, right? If you've installed, you know, other ways to build things, you can do that right now, right? I only have Mac OS X in here, I think. Yep. So, right, that's the only thing I can build for. And typically with most of these, you don't really need to use most of these settings too much. But if you need to build in another form, like say this WebGL, you just click on Install with Unity Hub, and it'll pop up Unity Hub. Like if I click on this, right, it's going to pop up. It's going to say Add Modules, and the module is already checkmarked to be added, right? And so I could click Done, and then it would install this, and then I could build for WebGL stuff, which is really great and pretty simple. So I'm going to go ahead and just close that for now because I'm not concerned about that right now. I'm going to close Unity Hub. Okay, so I've got this. So let's go ahead and close our build settings temporarily, and then go to Project, navigate to wherever our scenes are, and I'm going to double click on level 1. And once I'm in level 1, I might as well go ahead and create a game manager here as well. So I'm going to create empty. I'm going to rename it Game Manager. And then I'm going to add a flow machine. It will be a macro, but instead of using a new one, I'm going to go ahead and go through all of these macros I have in here and find the scene level changer, not scene changer. There we go. All right, so I've added level changer. And now what I can do is I can go to my flow graph. Everything should remain the same here. However, where I'm going to need to create a variable, because right now this variable does not exist and I will get an error. So, so I'm going to go ahead and type in scene name. I'm going to hit plus. I'm going to make this a string, and I'm going to make this value level 2. All right, so now I've got these two options. I'm going to save this. I'm going to come back up and go to Build Settings, and I'm going to click Add Open Scenes. And then I'm just going to I can drag these to adjust which one's in the right index. And because I want this to be my first scene that loads, right, I'm going to drag it up to index 0. So whatever item is set to index 0 is by default the one that's going to load first, right? So whenever you run your standalone app, scene 1, whatever this first one is the first thing that's going to load. So in our case, we want scene 1 to load first, or level 1 to load first, and then we'll switch to level 2. So I'm going to go ahead and close that, and now I'm going to go ahead and hit play, and I'm going to test this before I go and build it, and we'll see if we get any errors. Okay, so I'm going to hit enter, and there we go. Right, we have switched to scene 2, or level 2. So I'm going to hit enter again, and we should switch back to level 1. Right, so now we're switching between two scenes. Now I'm doing this with a keystroke, right? But you could do this with, any sort of state change, any sort of trigger that happens. A player walks through a doorway and goes from, scene 1 or level 1 to level 2, right? For really huge maps, it might make sense to break these things up. Or if you're going from an outdoor setting to a dungeon or a house, or whatever it is, right? That might be that point of transition that brings you into the new scene, right? And so there's all sorts of different options, but right now just the return key very quickly switches these things from one scene to the next. Okay, so I've got my two scenes that I want in this project, and so now I'm going to go back to my build settings, and there's a couple other things we need to talk about. So first, I could just click build and run right now, or build, and it would build the project. But it's going to give it a really strange name, and there's some other things that won't be visible. And so I'm going to go ahead and click on player settings, which is kind of a weird title for where you put all of your information about the project that you're working on. So right, so in this player settings here, which you'll note my input manager, all these other managers, right, are in here for this is all part of my project settings, but specifically the player manager. So you can put your company name in there. I'm just going to call my company Not Good, right? And then, right, it's going to name it whatever the file name is, but I'm going to call this best game with the letter number 3. And then ever with 3s as well, because LeetSpeak is still cool. And yeah, it'll be version 0.1. And then, right, I can select a default icon. So I'm going to go over here. And this is something from within your assets folder, right? So you'd have to bring in a 2D image to use as your icon. And I'm going to go ahead and wherever that smiley face was, there we go. Right, that's what I want my icon to be. Now, if for some reason I want some custom cursor for my mouse, I could also bring in a little pixel art thing for that. I could adjust the cursor hotspot. Right now it's set to 0, 0, which is just going to be the top left of the corner is where it will begin. That's fine. And then these are settings for the PC, Mac, and Linux standalones, right? If I had other build options, they would also be here, but currently that's all I've got. If I click on icon, right, because I have my default icon in here, this shows me what it looks like at these different resolutions. And so I could click at this override here and say, like, with the 16 by 16 or 32 by 32, some of the line work here isn't coming through as much. So I might want to go in and actually override with a smaller or maybe larger icon, depending on what I'm working on. But in this case, I'm going to leave all of that alone. Resolution and presentation, basically, should it start in full screen mode, or should it be windowed? Should it be exclusive full screen, right? What should I use? Native resolution as default. If I uncheck that, it will, choose something for me. Should I have the Retina support for the Mac, etc., etc., etc. There's, a bunch of other options here. that again, you know, it's things that you can change whenever as you build this. The splash image. So right when you basically when it pops up, should something splash, and then there's this list of potential logos as well. So you could, right, if I click on this and right, I can select a sprite and I can say, oh, I want to, maybe game over is the logo that I want to start with. I don't know. And by default, these logos play for 2 seconds. And the Unity logo is drawn below the logos, right? So if I click preview at this point, it might, yep, it might show that game over thing and then it starts, right? And so if I go back to my player settings now, right, because it automatically closes this so you can see, right, I can go ahead and make this adjustment. So I'm going to make this actually stay on screen for 4 seconds. I could have multiple logos, right, if there's multiple teams that are working on this project. Obviously, it's just me right now. Background color I can change. I could also put in a background image, right? And this is all. And then other settings are things you typically do not need to change. But occasionally, those change it, right? Occasionally you need to check mark something or whatever else if you're doing something special. In our case, I'm not doing anything special whatsoever, so I'm going to leave all of those additional settings alone. And so we've got our player settings set, so now we can go ahead and build our project. So I'm going to go ahead and click Build and Run, so it just runs as soon as it's done. So I'm going to click Build and Run, and I'm going to save this as best game is what I'm going to call it. I'm going to leave it in the same folder that I'm working on, so it's all in the same spot. And once I do this, it's going to take some time to build the project. So I don't have many assets, so it shouldn't take too long in those 2 scenes, but we'll see how long this goes. Okay, so it built, and now it's loaded and playing. Look at that. Look at that incredibly beautiful, amazing, unstoppable game. So now if I hit enter, I switch to scene 2, I hit enter, I switch back to scene 1, and note, like, and when I'm not in the renderer or not in the editor, things do tend to spin a little faster. And also, right, the switching between scenes goes significantly faster than it does when I'm doing that switch in the editor, right, which is nice. It's kind of funny with the water material on here. It's not casting any shadow, so the ball is just sort of spinning there by itself, which I find comical. Okay, so that's how you build your project in Unity. Now, again, if you have a lot of assets, that build is going to take significantly longer to complete. And so that's just something to note, is that you want to give yourself plenty of time for that project to build. All right, and by default, to get out of this, you just hit escape, I think. Nope, maybe you have to hit Command Q to quit. There we go. All right, so I had to quit that, right, or Control Q to quit. Okay, and that's the end of this tutorial. It's not too challenging of a process.